For more on the pandemic, from its origins until now, we bring in Andy Slavitt, a former senior advisor to the Biden administration's COVID-19 response team and the author of the new book, Preventable, the inside story of how leadership failures, politics, and selfishness doomed the U.S. coronavirus response. Mr. Slavitt, we thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So in your book, you discuss a few different areas where you say the American response to the pandemic failed, including the Trump administration downplaying the virus, top health officials overly worried about pleasing the former president, and even cultural attitudes present in the U.S. that differed from other countries that handled the virus well. Which factor, if any, is the most to blame for the U.S.'s initial struggles with the pandemic, in your opinion?
Well, it's easy to point to some of the technical mistakes that were very visible, not having enough testing in place. But even with that, I think we have to take a hard look at our political response. And, I think the thing that I have probably most concerned about us making sure we understand is not to respond in a way where the president spent months denying the virus and the seriousness of the virus and really squashing dissent within his administration. So, there were 45 days, as the book outlines, in February when no one from the Department of Health and Human Services was allowed to talk to the media because they simply wanted to use the phrase that things could change rapidly. And I think when you have a very difficult situation where you're trying to figure out what's going on and you don't allow people, particularly experts, to provide any dissenting voices if it's not consistent with the narrative, you're going to be in trouble.
And you also talk about the mistrust of science, from the former president discrediting scientists publicly to Americans becoming skeptical about changing pandemic guidelines. Where do you think that this mistrust comes from? And is this something that the Biden administration can reverse, especially for those who are still resistant to taking the vaccine?
Well, one of the hard things is when you have a phenomenon that you can't observe with your naked eye. And there was so much about this pandemic that just defied what we could see. It spread among people that were asymptomatic. It really did a lot of its damage outside of where we could see it. And it grew exponentially. You have to have, if you don't have faith in science and scientists to explain what's going on, you're really going to miss it. And, we had a remarkably low tolerance and would exploit the fact that if a scientist said something that they later had to change, that we would therefore want to say that they were wrong and they didn't know what they were talking about. And a lot of that was just a way of people on social media elevating their own opinions, personalities saying, aha, that person was wrong. Therefore, what I'm saying is right. And I think that kind of lack of respect for people who have been studying these things for a long time is really potentially damaging. And I think some of it was political. Some of it was just purely the lack of trust and expertise that's grown over time. I think President Biden's trying to fix this by allowing the CDC and the FDA to speak for themselves and by keeping the White House distant from what the experts are saying.
Earlier, we reported on the ongoing question on the origin of the virus and theories on whether or not it leaked from a lab in Wuhan. How important is it to answer that question and to get China to be more transparent in order to control this pandemic and also to prevent future ones?
Well, it's really important. I mean, just to say where we stand on this, nobody knows. The intelligence community has not landed on an answer, which, by the way, isn't unusual. Sometimes, unfortunately, takes a long time to figure this out. And the Chinese have to be cooperative. If they're not, we need to be very strong and very assertive as a world community to get them to be, to get that to happen. We know that the virus aerosolizes. So a minor leak in a lab could have, in fact, infected people in that lab, and that could have sprung the whole thing. Likewise, it could have come from bats.
You write about how the pandemic was politicized, but would there possibly have been a public health benefit to giving more credit to the Trump administration's work with companies to support development and distribution of vaccines instead of criticizing what was left to do for the incoming Biden administration? Could that have possibly helped to overcome some of that resistance that we're still seeing among some conservatives?
Well, I think I take this in two pieces. First of all, I don't think the Biden administration, I think the Biden administration was very restrained in terms of criticizing the Trump administration and tried to just move forward, not reflect on the past, but reflect on the job ahead. In terms of reaching people who have not been vaccinated, You're absolutely right. There's no reason for people to think about this as a political issue. This is a vaccine that was developed over the last 2 decades, Republican and Democratic administrations, by the private sector and the public sector. Everybody should feel good about the success of these vaccines and the multitude of people over 2 decades that participated in creating this mRNA vaccine and delivered it out to the public. Nobody should take a monopoly on credit, but people should also take their fair share of accountability when we don't deliver for the public. And I think President Biden was prepared to take and has been prepared to take full accountability to get Americans vaccinated. And I think that's what Americans needed to see.
You end your book hoping that the U.S. will remember the lessons learned in the past year as life starts to return back to normal. What's one lesson that you hope Americans will embrace as we move forward so that we're better prepared for the next potential pandemic?
I'm going to say that I hope we learn to be more generous with one another in tough times. Everybody's gone through a fair amount of suffering. For me, I may have lost a family member. For you, you may have lost a business that you started 10 years ago that you put your heart and soul into. And we don't need to compare suffering. All suffering is real. And, we allowed the pandemic to divide us even further. And I think for us to get through a pandemic and learn the lessons there, we have to really realize that, we have each other's fate in our hands. I think the other thing is that there are many, many people to whom a disproportionate share of the burden fell on. And we need to understand that these are people who disproportionate share of the burden always falls on. So kids who were not getting lunch because they weren't in school or didn't have internet access at home, those same symptoms persist after the pandemic as did during the pandemic. So we have an opportunity to fix these things now, and they will make us better prepared. I'm confident that we will do some of the other things needed, but if we don't really address how we value and support one another in these tough times, I think we're going to continue to struggle.
Andy Slavitt, our thanks to you. His new book, Preventable, is available tomorrow.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.